Hello and welcome to Conversations in Cleantech, the podcast that celebrates the clean tech industry and the people that power it, brought to you by Brightsmith. For our 7th season, we're speaking to clean tech leaders about the process of investing in a cleaner planet. From inspiring stories and words of wisdom to financial forecast and investment insights, you can learn all about the people and companies who are driving these investments and propelling us towards a cleaner, greener tomorrow. I'm your regular host, Jenny Gladman, but this season there's a twist. I'll be taking a few months off to have my second baby, so I'm handing the reins of our podcast over to a series of fellow Brightsmithers who will be Season 7's super co-hosts. So, without further hesitation,
hello, this is Carmen Davis, and I am one of the co-hosts of Conversations in Clean Tech and one of Brightsmith's ever-growing hydrogen team. Join us today as we delve into the journey of Linda Thrasher, a powerhouse bridging Capitol Hill, corporate giants, and Midwest farms, from founding a Fortune 500 company to spearheading groundbreaking Greenfield Nitrogen, shaping the future of sustainable agriculture and community empowerment. Linda, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Great to see you.
Yes, how's it going today?
Awesome. It's a good Friday, so thanks for asking.
Good. Well, maybe we can just start with a bit more about your career journey from starting out in law school on Capitol Hill to becoming the founding executive at the Mosaic Company and then eventually co-founding Greenfield Nitrogen.
Absolutely. So my background is this. When I graduated from law school, I planned to end up in the courtroom, not in the energy or agricultural sectors. In fact, when I left home in rural Iowa for college and law school, the ag economy was really in a very severe recession, and I never expected to return. But after I graduated from law school, a job transfer with my spouse landed us in Washington, D.C., and lo and behold, I ended up working on Capitol Hill and focused on agriculture and energy policy. And what's interesting is this policy and regulatory work ultimately began to open other doors, particularly in the corporate sector. So I joined Cargill, one of the world's largest food and agriculture companies. And then after being at Cargill for a decade, I left and joined their fertilizer spinoff, which they took out of Cargill, merged with another company, and had the fortunate opportunity of being one of the founding executives of this brand new merged company that we took public. So it was kind of a surprise twist in a career, but I absolutely loved parlaying my policy experience with the work of the business, particularly the fertilizer business. And most importantly, it also explains my transition to Greenfield Nitrogen, but I love working with a blank sheet of paper. And so after a number of years at this new company called Mosaic, I joined a small group of developers to look at expanding nitrogen fertilizer production in the Midwest. And so, Carmen, in a nutshell, that's how I got to where I'm at today.
Well, I really appreciate you for sharing all of that with us. And something that I love that you mentioned was just kind of taking the opportunities that were presented in front of you. How do you think, looking back, you navigated those twists and turns? And what do you think kind of guided you through those different transitions?
I think what guided me was actually a simple question. And I remember thinking this when I was asked to leave the Washington, D.C. area and join Mosaic. And I remember just thinking to myself when I was out on a run, if I don't make this move or, take this opportunity, will I regret it later? And so to me, it's all about not letting that regret piece bug you later if you decide not to do something. What I mean by that is what I've learned is that it's really important to take risks. And no matter what point you are in your life, and what's also interesting is there's a photo of myself and the management team launching the company, launching Mosaic, that is, on opening day. And we rang, I should say, the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange. And I say that because it's not all about glamour. What I realized when I looked at my smile and that, you're in the box and closing and with the audience, what the story behind that smile was, I was 20 weeks pregnant. I had uprooted my husband and his career and our 2-year-old daughter to move 1,000 miles away. And so by taking risk It doesn't mean they're pain free, but it also means that, here we are a number of years later, and I wouldn't have changed that decision for the world. So there is pain with risk, but the outcome often is something you will never regret. And that's where I sit today.
Absolutely. Wow. What a beautiful story. That really leads well into this next question. But, as a female entrepreneur in the clean tech sector, what challenges have you faced and overcome throughout your career? And how have these experiences really shaped your approach to business and leadership?
The first thing I'll just acknowledge that, historically, the agriculture and energy sectors have been fairly male dominated. I mean, it just is what it is. And you have to recognize that. And I think what I've learned is I've talked to you about, taking risk. I mean, I think that's really important. And the other piece to that is don't be afraid. I was the only woman on the management team when Mosaic was first formed. And yes, it's a little odd to sit in a management room. I was one of the youngest as well, but you've earned your way there. And to keep that in your mind and to remember that you're there for a job, you're there to speak up, execute, and do great things. And so I think it's important to keep first things first and not let the fact that you're a rare female in the room kind of cloud and make you second guess yourself. And the other thing that I think can help, it certainly helped me, and it has to help a lot of women today, especially those in the energy sector, which is regardless of gender, we are all part of this new industry and everyone is learning at the same time, regardless of gender, regardless of race. None of us are experts yet. And so the beautiful thing about the clean tech industry is that we're all coming in at the same base and we really need each other to learn. And so that has also kept me centered as we all navigate really this whole new landscape.
Exactly. And that's something that we share a lot within Brightsmith is that we have the advantage of this being an incredibly new sector. So we have the advantage of getting it right in terms of D&I and diversity and having different types of voices at the forefront because we're building all of this now. And so it's great to see businesses that have prioritized that and also helping businesses that maybe want to do that but have had a team that's been together for a long time and they're like, we'd really love to see diversity in our business, and there's also businesses that can help support that. So that's all great to hear. Awesome. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about Greenfield Nitrogen and its mission around developing low carbon ammonia facilities in the upper Midwest, and maybe a little bit even around what inspired you to this venture in this area of clean tech.
So Greenfield is a grassroots company, and we were created by farmers for farmers. And I'll explain what that means. But our founder and our co-founder have deep expertise in the agricultural industry. I come from a foundation of agriculture and fertilizer through my corporate background and my policy background, and also was raised on the farm. So all of us, I think, have farming in our DNA. And what we realized is that when you look at the farmer today, is the farmer has very few, if any, opportunities to invest in their inputs. So what happens is they become price takers. And there's a little bit of a line in agriculture. In fact, it's been used for decades, but farmers buy retail, whether that is their seeds, their chemicals, their fertilizers, whatever they might need, but they sell wholesale, which is their commodities, their livestock, or their soybeans or corn. And so farmers are never able to reduce their input costs. And so for us, what we wanted to do was we studied the ethanol industry, which has been wildly successful, particularly in the Midwest. And what made that industry so successful is farmers had what is the cliche of a win-win. They could sell their corn to a local ethanol facility, but they could also invest and take a dividend. And that has changed the fortunes of many, many farmers. What our goal with Greenfield is to let farmers invest in a fertilizer facility that just makes nitrogen fertilizer. And then secondly, if the company's profitable, they too can take a dividend. And that dividend in many respects serves as a hedge on their fertilizer costs. And it allows them, not necessarily to control volatility, but to be able to manage their volatility better, especially in fertilizer, which is a highly volatile commodity. So that's the first part. So this is a completely tailored farmer company. We're not a cooperative, we're farmer invested and farmer owned. The second piece, Carmen, that I want to emphasize is we decided to produce ammonia. And so, just for anyone who's not familiar with the nitrogen fertilizer industry, ammonia is the building block for any form of other nitrogen fertilizers. So, if you want to make urea, ammonium nitrate, you have to begin with ammonia. So we said, we're going to build the building block. We can talk about products later. Originally, our goal was just to produce fertilizer. But as you know, in the last 5 years, I mean, talk about a sea change. All of a sudden, we have better technology that has become available. We have more information on the climate that has really forced us to look at our business model. And so we evolved from what I'll call that traditional gray ammonia design to really thinking about low carbon with the ability to also produce green fertilizer later. And so our goal ultimately is if farmers can buy low carbon ammonia, they can produce a low carbon corn crop and send that low carbon product to a biofuels facility like ethanol, to the protein, our food manufacturers, and ideally receive a premium for that product. So for us, it was really putting the farmer in a really good position in that whole value chain. And so at the end of the day, it's all about the farmer and the value chain reducing their carbon footprint.
That's really incredible work. And, that's what I love that you touched upon, how the farmer has both the stake within the company as well as can be a part of this larger value chain that is growing and is inevitable, and it's helping all different aspects of that value chain. So that's really incredible work. I remember you mentioning the importance of community involvement and promoting education for girls and women. And how do you think you integrate these values into the work at Greenfield Nitrogen? And what do you hope to kind of impact or achieve in that regard?
Sure. So on the community involvement side, I want to touch that first before I talk about young girls and women. The community is a really, really critical piece, especially for any company like us that is in the development stages of building a manufacturing facility. And you have to have your community absolutely right along with you as you're going through it. What has helped Greenfield Nitrogen is that many of our investors are from the local Northern Iowa community that we're in. That has helped us significantly. And in addition, we are absolutely lucky to have great support from the local county, from local officials, and the state of Iowa. And I joked once with the Hancock County Economic Development Organization that I don't care how long this takes. I might be in assisted living before this facility gets done. It is going to get done. And they were nodding and supportive. And so the community is absolutely central. You have to bring them in from the very onset. So they've stuck with us, and we are so grateful. With respect to women and girls, so because Greenfield is a development company, we have not scaled up, we have not hired, we haven't even started construction yet because we're still completing the financing phase. But what I will say is, regardless of the fact that I can't hire more women or train younger women, I'm a huge believer in being generous with your network. You have to be a door opener, and you especially have to be a door opener the older you get. And so what I always try to do is share my contacts, share my network, perhaps in the case of a young woman, help bolster their resume and to be in a position to really help someone, because I've been helped. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for standing on the shoulders, really, quite frankly, of both great women and great men. So my goal is to help in many individual ways now, and longer term to be in a position of much more influence.
Absolutely. I think that's so important, and often a piece that people miss. In the corporate world, we feel like all of the initiatives around workforce development and diversity and bringing more women into this field have to be corporately done. But I think it's so important to have those interpersonal relationships, to get down with folks that are aspiring to have roles within your career trajectory, and really investing in them. And I think that can go often even a further way than some initiatives at some companies. And so I think that is a really, really pivotal piece. In terms of community involvement, I know you mentioned obviously the political aspects and being really involved in that local aspect of government. So I'd love for you to touch upon, in relation to your experience navigating Capitol Hill and the policy piece, how that interplays with your role now, and some of the things that you've discovered through that.
Well, it's been a little surprising to see my career come full circle. As a young, and I think I was, 24 years old, just out of law school. So as a young Capitol Hill staffer to now an entrepreneur who knows that our company's destiny hinges on what happens in Washington. I never thought I would say that even 3 years ago, and I'm saying that today. And so, my biggest learning in the past few years is that the federal government is a must-have for establishing a new sector, especially when it so broadly impacts our entire domestic and even global economy. And as much as the government is often criticized, it is going to take significant public and private collaboration. And so I sit here many years later saying, we have got to work together. I mean, we absolutely have to. The other term that I'd like to use is when you have an entirely new sector like hydrogen or clean energy, it's going to take decades for us to really evolve. This is a long-term game. This is not a flash in the pan. And where the government needs to play a role is really at the beginning of this. They have to be the catalyst to spearhead investment. And we'll talk about this later, but one of the issues is who wants to bear the risk? Investors are very squeamish about it. And so we need the government to really provide a toolbox. And the toolbox has to be, and it does, it includes this already, but tax credits, loan guarantees, grants, and quite frankly, potentially even mandates. It almost has to kind of force this market into existence and give us a crutch, quite frankly, for the next decade so we can get on our sea legs and move forward. But without that, this whole clean tech arena is going to take a long time to launch. So as much as we get frustrated with the government, it really has to be, quite frankly, our best friend. The other tiny piece I want to mention in terms of policy, just to demonstrate how much even a modest policy change can change business behavior in this industry. So let's take, and this is to a US audience who's familiar with 45Q, for the low carbon ammonia, but it was previously a tax credit of $60 per metric ton. And when the IRA law came into existence and changed that to $85, so we're talking about a modest $25 dollar increase per ton, the low carbon industry literally grew overnight. And so even modest tweaks and changes, and I realize this is a cost to the federal government, but can really spur an industry. And so those are the things we have to think about. But our destiny, for better or for worse, really hinges on Washington, D.C. policy right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how would you say, because I love what you touched upon with the fact that this energy transition is a piece that is long and has a long history even before us getting to the place that we are now. I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the things you mentioned around that, how this world is kind of expanding and what you think the future might hold for this sector.
Absolutely. And so one way I'm going to answer that first is just to go back to the longevity piece, because this is a long game. So one of the things we have to remember is that if you, in the, statistics show this, but when we made as a kind of a global economy, the transition from biomass, which was really wood, to coal, it literally took a century. And then we added coal and nuclear, and eventually we added, wind and solar, which I will call kind of the older renewables that are, felt new several decades ago. And now we're adding hydrogen. So the first piece is these are really, really multi-decade processes. And so what we have to remember when we're working with Washington is that we have to have enough of something, which is the IRA. We'll talk about the 45V tax credit, which I think is going to give me white hair. But those initiatives are really what get us out of the gate. But the but to that is we have a multi-year lift ahead of us. And when a lot of companies talk about the 2030 goals, their 2050 goals, I'm very ambitious, but this is a game of patience. And we're going to realize that, 2030 is 6 years away. We are not going to have these issues solved. And I think if you don't mind me using one example, I think the Section 45V or the hydrogen production tax credit is the prime example. We waited 18 months for IRS guidance after a very loosely written law that was part of the IRA. The preliminary guidance comes out and it's strict. It's almost impossible to meet. The electrical companies are absolutely struggling with it. I actually think it's almost going to derail some of the very significant hub funds that were given, in late 2023. We're going to get a final rule sometime this year. It's an election year, so we'll probably get a final rule hopefully by the fall, and then we're going to enter the litigation process. And my concern is at this point, you have policy colliding with the court system, which in its simplest terms means this green industry in the US is going to be at a standstill while we wait out what happens. And so time is of the essence, but it's going to take some swift movement and hopefully not lengthy litigation to really get us over kind of the hump of being able to go out and really develop projects.
Absolutely. That all was so poignant and very apropos for the moment that we are in this time. I think I mentioned it on my last conversation with Jessica Elwell, but this November 2024 is looming in the future, and I think everyone's kind of hanging on their hinges, trying to decide what they're going to do. And so, it's going to be a very pivotal moment for us to figure out how we're going to navigate the new policies, how folks are going to react to whatever might come out or be held back, and really see how things go. And I'm curious to see what you think about the role investors play within this. And I know obviously it's sometimes chicken before the egg before the chicken, which one goes after which. But what are your thoughts around investment in clean tech and what part they play in this bigger picture?
I'll say I have lots of things to say, but I'll say a few things. So one is, we need them and they have the opportunity to play a very big role. A few things that I want to point out that to me, I think are very critical from the investment viewpoint is that they need to understand this is a long game. And we just talked about that, but a lot of investors like quarterly returns. They like to show, annual returns with IRRs that are, mid-teens to low 20s. And my biggest advice for them is if you want to be in the low carbon, clean, green space, whatever you choose to call it, this is a multi-year, multi-decade game. And if this is not suitable for your fund, consider a traditional industry. I've had the luxury of working in a company like Cargill for a decade, which is a really long-term thinker. And that same mindset really needs to apply to the investment sector as well. So the second piece that I want to give to, or a piece of advice that I would give to the investment community is you can't have it both ways. We have funds calling us all the time because they want to be in the green space. They're really excited about low carbon products. And when we ask about rates of return, my jaw drops. They want to see 20%, which is not even what the stock market returns on an average annual basis. And so you can't get it both. If you decide you want to be in clean, low carbon, or green, you really have to change your expectations. And we've noticed that very few want to do that. So we have a bit of a joke in our company when we talk to private equity funds. When they say green, we know they mean greenbacks, not green products. And it's absolutely true. So the last piece of advice that I would in guidance that I would give the investment community is I'm going to quote from there was an English novelist and playwright. His name was John Galsworthy, and he used a line in one of his pieces that has always stuck with me. And it's the line that beginnings are always messy. And here we sit right now, just I think we all feel like it's kind of a mess. We don't, at least in the US, we don't know about 45V. The regulations aren't complete. The financing is squeamish. And so, my advice to the investment community, which we all love certainty, but we have to embrace the messiness of this nascent market. We have to remember we have a lack of supply, a lack of infrastructure, and we don't have a market with pricing. We do not have a lot of pricing transparency because people aren't buying the product. And so when you have those three pillars missing, it makes financing just more challenging. So there's going to be kind of an unwieldy Wild West kind of feeling to this industry for a few years. And it really means you have to have a stomach if you want to finance these projects.
I completely agree. And, you know, you're right. It is a long game and the benefits are huge, but you have to be willing to be in it for the long game and invest and see the kind of ups and downs that come with that. So yes, that's all very true. I think it's also great to always have some comfort around, you know, the promises of the market and what this could really do. So could you maybe share some insights around, you know, the market dynamics and potential opportunities for low carbon ammonia, and considering factors like the agribusiness we've mentioned, but also, you know, freight, shipping, and, you know, even any market resistance that you've encountered and overcome so far?
Absolutely. So I think the market is huge. And you know, we've heard this from many different sectors. I think the opportunities with ocean freight shipping, long haul transportation, industrial and agricultural use are enormous. And so we're discovering is the challenge when we think about if there's any resistance in the market, it's not for the products. Everybody wants them. It's really for the premium prices that might be required. So we know the freight industry, we've watched the global freight industry for years, and they've made some really impressive transitions to embracing ammonia as a bunker fuel. But if you ask what they want to pay the price of a traditional gray ton of ammonia. And so to me, the landscape is huge. The opportunity is wide, but it's getting over kind of that line of recognizing these, if you want to buy low carbon, if you want to buy green, you now have higher costs of production. You know, electrolyzers are quite expensive and will come down eventually. So is carbon capture equipment. And the other piece to remember is that often in the green ammonia business, if you use, you know, the electrolyzers, which is what people do with renewable electricity, that is, can compose roughly 90% of your cost of production, that is. And so what we have to remember as well, the market is very vast and there's a lot of opportunities. And I'm actually going to talk about one that we feel, you know, is the space where Greenfield is in, but it's huge. It's the pricing that's holding the market back. And we recognize that. So the market that I haven't talked about that I think is absolutely huge, if I can, is agriculture. And what's happening in this ag sector is it's really a numbers game. And it's a numbers game for the companies that make the inputs, whether it's fertilizer, seed, or pesticides. It's a numbers game for the farmer. And it's also a numbers game for the food or protein manufacturers, because the consumers like us, right, want lower carbon products. And so at the end of the day, I want to go back to the value chain proposition that I talked about at the beginning, which is if we can create low carbon products like fertilizer, so the farmer can produce low carbon corn, that allows, if the corn is sold to the ethanol industry, for example, the ethanol industry can have a very low carbon score, which allows them to then use their products, whether it's the California market or elsewhere. So where the opportunity is, and this is why we're in the niche of agriculture, is it's the whole value chain that ultimately ends up with the consumer who's either pumping fuel into his or her car or, eating a piece of protein. So the opportunity is huge, but we have to account for the entire value chain, recognizing it has to begin somewhere, which is why we're staying in that space of, green or low carbon ammonia.
It's a great idea, and I think you have a ton of promise over at Greenfield Nitrogen. So I'm super excited to see what happens and what y'all bring forward. Well, I think finally, I would just love to ask you any advice that you would love to give individuals aspiring to enter this sector or pursue entrepreneurship, especially coming from the backgrounds of law and policy.
Of course, after all these years, who doesn't have advice, right? The advice I would give, I have a few pieces of advice. The first would be everything you've done in your career. I was trained as a lawyer, but have never practiced law. I spent a lot of time in policy. Everything you do is additive. And don't be afraid. I'm still struck by one of your podcasts with the chief people officer from Monolith, who was I think a psychology and math major. And it was so impressive to listen to. So you have to remember that there's not a degree that you have to enter into this business. Everything you do as a foundation is going to be helpful. And what you need to do is add to that. So if you don't have the finance piece, learn it. If you don't have the kind of the chemical energy piece, learn it. So anyone can start with a foundation. It's really just your own desire and curiosity to learn. The second piece of advice I would give, to me, which is probably the most important, is embrace the paradox of being flexible. By that, I mean have a plan in place, but be open to adaptation. And as an entrepreneur, I've had to learn to stay focused on that North Star, which is clean energy, low carbon ammonia, but absolutely remain flexible as the policy and regulatory winds have evolved and impact our project economics and as new technology comes online. So always keep that fluidity and flexible piece as part of your kind of MO when you're in this type of work. And it's hard, but it also makes it much easier to navigate when changes come your way. And then the last piece is really just a piece of inspiration that, I would end with, which is I believe this transition we're in today, even if it's this kind of messy beginning that I referenced several minutes ago, I really believe it's not a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's really a less than a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so no matter what happens, to have the ability to witness this transition, I think is incredible. And if there's any trepidation about joining this industry, it's that you get to be a witness to the beginning of this multi-decade clean sector, clean energy transition. And honestly, Carmen, what can be more exciting than that?
Exactly. I completely agree. I always say it's like the wild, wild west. We have this huge opportunity in front of us, and we just have to go out and take it. And it's really, really exciting. And I'm so thankful for you coming on and sharing your insight and your story. It's so powerful, and I know it's going to inspire many that are looking to get into this industry and are looking to invest in a cleaner planet. So I really appreciate the time today, Linda.
Thank you, Carmen. And it was a delight to talk with you, as it always is. Thanks.
Well, have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.